class, welcome to today's math lesson. We are in lesson 26, session 3. And last session we learned how to write fractions that are in tenths and hundredths as decimals. Well, today's lesson we're actually doing the opposite. We are going to learn how to write decimals into fractions. And we're going to learn it in two different ways, two different model it ways that you can actually write these. So our actual problem that we're trying to solve, that's the example, is written up here, and it says, Eli collects animal cards. He says that 5/100ths of his cards are endangered animal cards. What fraction of his cards are endangered animal cards? So our first model it has a 100 chart written, and it has 5 of the hundreds shaded in to represent 5 hundredths. That's represented by this decimal right here. And then our second model it shows you the place value chart, which I feel is probably one of the easiest ones to draw ourselves. And remember, we have a 0 in the tenths column, which is put down right down here. And then we have a 5 in the hundredths column, which is put in the hundredths place right here. So the way we would say this number, we would say 0 and 5 hundredths. So this is how we write it as a decimal. Now we're figuring out how to convert this to a fraction. And if we move on to the next page, which is going to be page 547, number 1 says, how can the model help you write a fraction equivalent to 5 hundredths? Well, you could see that if the hundredths chart has 100 spaces, we can write that as our denominator, and we only have 5 of them shaded in, right? So we would write our fraction as 5/100. And then if we look at the place value chart on the previous page, it says, the question asks, how can the place value chart help you write a fraction equivalent to 5 hundredths? Well, we know that if we go into the hundredths column, we have to have a denominator of 100, and we have nothing in the tenths column here, and only a single 5, so we just put 5/100. And number 3 says, use words to describe the fraction of Eli's cards that are endangered animals, and the fraction would be 5 hundredths. Number 4 says, what fraction of Eli's cards are endangered animal cards? And again, that answer is 5 hundredths, or 5/100. And this one says, number 5, explain how you can write a decimal in hundredths as a fraction. So I would say you would write the two numbers after the decimal over 100. And we're going to get an opportunity to practice this over and over again on our next few examples on page 548. So let's look at number 7. It says write 9/10ths in words and as a fraction. Show your work. Well, I'm going to go ahead and this time write out the ones column. So I'm going to put 0 and 9/10ths. And I'm going to go ahead and also write out our little chart to help us. And then I'm going to do the hundredths right here, because I'm a visual learner and I like to see information displayed in multiple different ways. So I have this number has a 0 in the ones column, and then we only have a 9 in the tenths. So I would actually say this number 0 and 9/10ths. But now it wants us to write this in words and as a fraction. So I know that I only have one number in the tenths column. So it's gonna be over 10 and I have the number 9. So it is 9/10. Okay, number 8 says write 0 and 89/100ths in words and as a fraction and show your work. So I'm gonna say it and write it, 0 and, words, 89/100ths. And I know this because if I line it up into this place value model, it'll be really obvious. So I have a 0 and 89/100ths. Now it wants us to also write this number as a fraction, and because I go into the hundredths column, I have 2 digits over, I know it's over 100, and I'm gonna put my 89 over the 100. Okay, so let's look at our next one. This one says select all the fractions that are equivalent to 0 and 2/10. Equivalent, so all. So when it says select all, it means more than one, and it wants equivalent to 2/10. And so what I wanted to show you guys is that let's go ahead and write this as a fraction as it is and see if we can't find the equivalent fraction in hundredths. So we know that only one column is used, so that is the tenths place. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a 10 as my denominator there and put my 2 above it. And if I want an equivalent fraction in hundredths to this one, I always multiply by 10, and then if I do that to the denominator, I have to do that to the numerator, so I'm gonna get 21/100ths. So 2/10 is the same as 21/100ths, and so essentially 0 and 2/10 is also the same as 0 and 20/100ths. So now let's look and see if we have any of those options over here. So 200ths cannot be correct because we know that we are at 2/10 and 20/100ths, but we see the 21/100ths here, the 2/10 here, and on these last two, they've switched the numerator and denominator, so those can automatically be ruled out right there. Okay, so the next work that you're gonna be working on is gonna be page 549 and 550.